Okay, so thank you for joining me in this podcast, Brain in You. Very, very happy to have you here. I really look forward to interacting with adults who are independent, who are now pursuing a career, and they're also advocating about autism. So I'm very excited to hear what you have today. And a lot of parents who are our customers or who follow us on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram will also be very excited to learn so much from you as to what it is, how life can be, how successful can you be, how can you actually use your strengths in the right way and carve out a career out of it. So I'll start by asking you first, Alex, just tell me something about yourself. We'll start from there.
My name's Alex Manners. I live in the UK and currently I'm 27. I was diagnosed with having Asperger's syndrome when I was 10 years old. And whilst there's been a lot of challenges of having Asperger's, specifically when I was at school, there have also been lots of positives of having that diagnosis as well.
Mm,
So when I was first diagnosed, my dad told me that it was a positive thing that gave me special powers. So
mm,
from then on, I've always viewed my diagnosis as something positive and something that I feel lucky to have been able to manage over the past
mm,
27 years.
No, that's excellent. You mentioned that it was tough in school. What was it, and how did you manage? I mean, you have spent 12 years in school. What did you do to manage all that?
Well, for me, going to school always used to feel like I was going to prison. And just to get
Okay.
me into my primary school every day was a huge struggle for my mum
Mm,
because I used to suffer from a lot of anxiety about having to be left there every day.
mm,
In my primary school, I was bullied by some of my people in my year group, but it
mm,
also felt like some of the teachers were bullying me as well because it felt
mhm,
like that they didn't have, or they didn't want to put the things in place that I needed, and that they had preconceived ideas about what Asperger's and what autism was. So for me, I used to have a lot of meltdowns when I would come home from school on a
mm,
weekly basis because I didn't feel confident enough to tell any
mhm,
of the teachers in school what was
mm,
going wrong, what I was struggling with. A few things were put in place when I was in school. Like, for instance, I had a timeout system, which meant if I was feeling stressed during the lesson, I was
mhm.
able to give my teacher a little counter that I had in my pocket, and she then
Mhm.
knew that I was going to go into a quiet place
Okay.
for a few minutes just to relax. And I also met with the school Senko in primary school for 5 or 10 minutes uh, every morning and before the end of each day, which was useful, but I really needed to see her for a lot longer.
So tell me, Alex, this whole timeout token that you had, was it specially designed for you? Did your
It
parents
was,
request? Okay.
yeah, it was something that was designed for me because sometimes I just felt like I
Okay.
just had to get out of a certain lesson if I was feeling really
Yeah.
stressed.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, football has always been a great way to help me to de-stress. So in a
Mm,
lesson, if I was feeling stressed, I would get one of my football programs out and start
mm,
reading it. But
mm,
then I'd get loads of people in my class
mm,
telling on me to the teacher that I was
mm.
doing something that I shouldn't be doing, and then I'd be told off. So this was a system that was designed that enabled me to be able to go to a quiet space on my
Yeah.
own
Yeah.
and read one of my football programs to help me to de-stress.
I think this is a very, very useful tip. So tell me, Alex, so when you were getting these meltdowns or anxiety attacks, you used to go back home and tell your parents? What is it that you used to say, or did they just understand from your behavior? So how did that change happen that they understood that Alex needed this help?
Well, when I was in school, because I didn't trust any of the teachers, I would bottle everything up until I got home, and then one little thing at home would make me go straight into a meltdown. But it wouldn't be that one thing that had caused me to have that meltdown. It would have been a series of 7 or 8 things that had gone on during the school day or during the
Mm,
school week, and it was that one thing at home that was I felt like that last little piece of string inside me snapping, and
mm,
that would cause me to have a meltdown. So when I was younger, I would go straight into a meltdown and I would be shouting at my parents, nagging them for probably about an hour. However, now I'm older, I can better recognize when a meltdown is going to start. So for me now, I usually just become so overwhelmed with the situation that I'm in that I will just go to the quietest place I can find, sit down, and start crying. So I
okay,
still have meltdowns to this day, but they're not as frequent and they don't last as long as they used to when I was in school.
I get it. So, but when you were younger, would you tell your parents that I am about to have a meltdown, or they would understand that you're having a meltdown? How did that transition? Because it's also not easy for a parent to understand. So let's say you were a 5-year-old kid and you were doing this. It's not easy for a parent to understand that this is something. This is when we have to leave him alone. This is when he needs a quiet room or a quiet space. How did you make them understand that, or what did they do that they understood?
Well, my parents have always been, I always say that I'm very lucky that they've been very, very understanding. So
Mm,
as soon as I was diagnosed with Asperger's, my dad wanted to read as much and learn as much about Asperger's and about autism that he possibly could. So he
mm,
bought loads of books on it to
mm.
make himself as clued up and aware of what
Okay.
Asperger's and autism was as possible. But when it comes to a meltdown, when I was younger, I would come home from school and there wouldn't really be any warning signs that I was going to have a meltdown. I would literally go straight into one. So it would have been very hard for my parents to know
Mm,
that I was
okay.
going to have a meltdown. I think they always knew that there was a possibility when I came home from school of having a meltdown
Okay.
because of how stressed I'd found school and
Yeah.
how many things that they knew I struggled with when I was at school.
Got it.
But there wasn't really any warning signs of it. I went straight into a meltdown.
Got it. So going back down your memory lane, Alex, do you have certain things in mind that you can say to other parents that your parents did absolutely right? As a child who had Asperger's, you are fortunate that they understood or they did certain things in a certain way. Is there something like that?
Yeah, so as I said before, when I was first diagnosed, my dad told me about the positives of having that
Mm,
diagnosis rather than the negatives. And
mm,
that really, really helped me because whenever I was in a stressful situation or I needed um, to get out, to go to a quiet space on my own, my dad was always available to speak to. He was always there for
mm,
me to call on the phone if I was at school and I was stressed. And he always spoke to me about the positives in every situation. So if I was having a stressful time at school or I was worried about something or stressed about something, he would always try and make me find the positives in those
mm,
situations rather than just looking at the negatives or the things that were
mm,
worrying me or making me stressed. So I would say that, if you've got a child with a diagnosis of Asperger's or with autism, I would say focus on your child's positives rather than the
mm,
challenges or the negatives that they may face as a result of that diagnosis. And having that one person, my uncle was, I had an uncle who was exactly the same, who I could phone and speak to whenever I needed to. And he always,
yeah,
like my dad, helped me to de-stress. So having someone or one or two people who I knew I could phone or contact or speak to at any time of the
mm,
day
mm,
whenever I needed to, was unbelievable because it stopped me in to a certain degree, bottling everything up, bottling all my worries up until a later time.
that's wonderful. Anything you could go back and probably you would want to change or tell parents that, you could have done that differently or not done that?
Well, I think there was a lot of things about my time in school that I would have changed. Um, I was very lucky that for my secondary school, because I'd been diagnosed when I was 10 years old in primary school, I was able to go to a secondary school that had a lot more support in place and that was a lot smaller. Um, my primary school was a really big school, and I don't think the teachers really understood Asperger's or understood autism that well at all. So I think if I was to change something, um, I would have liked to have gone to a smaller school for
Mm,
primary school rather than just for secondary school because the
mm,
smaller class sizes really,
mm,
really help. And I think
mm,
having more individuals and teachers who understood what I was going through and my hidden disability was fundamental in me getting through secondary school. So I think going to a smaller school would have been really, really helpful. And I think in primary school specifically, having more teachers that actually understood autism and understood what it meant for me because they had preconceived ideas about it, and I felt that they
yeah,
didn't understand, my traits because my traits were different to the stereotypes that they
yeah,
knew. So I think
yeah,
having more teachers or having teachers that understood autism better
yeah,
would have been really helpful.
yeah. Tell me, Alex, what are your traits? How do you define yourself today? What are your strengths?
So, sorry, what are my strengths or
Yeah,
traits?
or traits. Yeah, yeah, both.
Yeah. So for me, some of my traits of my autism is that I find certain sounds and the feel of certain objects really difficult. So
Mm,
labels in the back of shirts unbearable. I have to take all the labels out of the back of my shirts. Certain noises like ticking radiators, ticking clocks. drive me insane. I can never ever concentrate on anything if I can hear a ticking clock or a ticking radiator. Meltdowns, again, as I've mentioned, are something that I have on a regular basis, but I've just been able to become better at recognizing them. And then some of the other traits that I have, communication. So I feel quite lucky that I'm quite confident at communicating with other people, but sometimes I take things very, very literally. So when people are asking me a question, often I take what they say very, very literally because I have a
Yeah.
very black and white way of thinking.
Mm,
And many people with Asperger's or with autism may have a special interest they're obsessed with.
mm,
And I'm absolutely obsessed with football. So football
okay.
dominates my whole life. And it's actually been a great way for me to cope over the years
Mm,
with
mm,
some of the challenges that I've had to face.
mm. So do you play football now professionally or?
I don't play football, but I go to watch football matches
Okay.
every
Oh,
single
okay.
week.
Okay.
And I in the UK, I've watched a match at all 92 professional football league clubs,
Mm,
and I completed that one a few years ago when I was 22. And for
mm,
most people, they don't complete it till they're about, if they do complete it ever, it's not till they're probably 50 or 60. So to complete all the 92 clubs, watching a match at them at such a young age,
mm.
um, is just amazing, really. But yeah,
Yeah.
football literally dominates my whole life.
Yeah. 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 So this is excellent. When I see you, I was about to ask you. So before we were supposed to have this conversation, did you have that uh, span of anxiety you felt you're going to be speaking to a stranger, or what kind of conversation you'll have? Did you have that? And if you did, then, or if you do with anybody else, how do you manage that?
I don't really feel anxious or stressed or nervous when I'm going to present a talk or speak to somebody new. I'm quite lucky that I've always been quite a confident person, and I always say that when I'm going to speak in front of a large group of people or talk about my experiences, I never get nervous. And I always like to say that that's one of my Asperger's superpowers. And because many of my friends who have also got that diagnosis wouldn't feel confident at speaking to new people,
Mm,
presenting a talk or talking about their experiences. I
mm,
want to use, as I call it, that superpower to educate and inspire as many people as I can. So whenever I'm speaking to somebody new or, doing a present, producing a podcast or
mm,
presenting a talk, I
mm.
feel very lucky that I never, never, ever feel
Very
nervous.
good. Very good. So what are your plans now, Alex? So 27, you're doing podcasts, you are maybe advocating for Asperger's, speaking to parents, speaking to adults like you. What is your plan going down the line?
Well, at the moment, I have my own business where I go all over the UK and the world presenting talks on what it's like to live with Asperger's and with autism and
Mm,
what it's like to work with, to go to school with. So I
mm,
present talks to loads and loads of different companies, charities, banks, loads and loads of different places. So for me going forward, I'd love to just carry on doing that because I
yeah,
absolutely love it. One of
yeah.
my other ambitions is to become a TV presenter.
Mm,
So I'd love to have my own show on television.
mm,
Another area I'm quite passionate on is children's television.
okay,
So I used to present my own children's radio show on a local radio station where I live in
okay,
England. So I'd
okay.
love to produce my own children's shows, be a presenter on the television. And I've also written and published my own book all
Wow.
about my life living with Asperger's.
Mm,
And I've just finished writing my second one. So I'd like to produce a few more books. Um,
okay,
Maybe not just about Asperger's and autism, maybe children's books as well.
cool.
So um, those are some of my ambitions going forward.
Wow. Wow. So Alex, you're 27 now, so somebody who is 27 goes through a series of personal relationships. Have you been lucky to have a relationship with a fellow partner, or do you think it has its own challenges? How do you manage that?
For me, I always say that a romantic relationship and going on a date are one of the only areas that I really ever feel nervous for. I've been on a few dates before, but I've been very nervous for them. And I think it's I because I have a very black and white way of thinking, and I find reading facial expressions and body language very difficult. I think if someone doesn't tell me exactly how they're feeling, then I find it hard to know how they are feeling.
Hmm.
So if someone was really like me, unless they actually told me I really like you or I'd like to go on a date with you, I
Hmm.
wouldn't know at all. And
Hmm.
I always find it very I always get very nervous if I like someone. I don't want to make them feel awkward, or I don't know when it's
Yeah.
right to, maybe ask someone out. So I think the whole dating scene is one area where I do feel, or one of the only areas really where I've ever felt nervous. But at the moment, I'm not in a relationship, and I haven't really been in one previously.
Okay. Okay. So when you were growing up, Alex, typically when I speak to um, adults, young adults like yourself, they always share one thing with me that in the initial part of their life, they tried very hard to impress their parents. They tried very hard to be like their peers, like their neighbors' kids, or like their friends. Did you face that pressure? And if you did, how did you manage it?
For me, I was very lucky that my parents just wanted me to be happy. They just
Mm,
wanted me to stop feeling stressed and stop
mm,
having a terrible time in school. So my parents said, whatever works for you, whatever you
mm,
enjoy, just go and pursue it because we want you
mm,
to be as happy as you possibly can. So, for instance, when I was taking my exams when I was in secondary school, my parents said to me, "Don't pick the subjects that you're best at. Pick the subjects you enjoy the most, even if you're
yeah,
not quite as good as them at those subjects as other subjects. Pick the subjects that you enjoy the most because the most important thing is your
yeah,
happiness." And they always said to me, "If you don't like something, just especially if it was something out of school, just don't do it because there's no point doing something that you don't enjoy just to try and fit in or impress someone, or
yeah.
it's more
Wow.
important that you're."
Mm,
So I was very lucky that that's what my parents
yeah,
instilled in me.
yeah.
So I never really had the pressures of trying to fit in with other people. Um,
Mm,
I was always quite a confident person anyway, so I always had the mindset that if someone doesn't like the way I dress or doesn't like the same subjects as me, then that's that's their problem. It's
that's their
nothing
problem.
I should
Yeah,
be worried about.
yeah. I think that's a really strong message. I don't know. You're just blessed with the best of the parents right now. Let me tell you that. Okay, that's interesting. So, Alex, now, is there any advice you would want to give to fellow adults, young adults, teenagers who are on the autism spectrum or who have Asperger's, or to their parents?
I would say to anyone, any young adult or who's on the spectrum or any parent, one thing I would always say is pursue your passions, do the things that make you happy. You know, um, I absolutely love football, and it's helped me to de-stress and cope with a lot of the challenges I've faced over the years. Some of my friends who have also been diagnosed have slightly more unusual interests. Like my one friend who I went to school with is obsessed with anything to do with bins and rubbish. And if looking at photos of bins or watching programs about recycling really helps him, then
Mm,
allow him to pursue that interest. Because
yeah,
if it helps him, then that's the only thing that really matters. So I'd
yeah,
always say allow that person pursue the things that they're interested in, because it really can help them to cope with some of the challenges they're facing, and also it can help them to socialize with other people as well. So that's one thing I would always say. And another thing I would always say is wherever you are, always, as I call it, take a coping strategy with you. So for
mm,
me, I carry a football program with me wherever I go because I know if I'm
okay,
feeling stressed in a certain environment, reading my football program will help me to de-stress. So always have at least one coping strategy or coping mechanism with you at any one time, so that if you do feel stressed or you need to calm down or be in a quiet space, you've got something there that can help you to relax and de-stress. So I'd say those are the two biggest pieces of advice that I could tell people like myself. And I think one other piece of advice I've just thought of is focus on the positives of your diagnosis rather than the challenges, because there are so many things that people with Asperger's and with autism can do that are absolutely amazing that other people may not be able to do as well as us. So I always say focus on the positive aspects of that diagnosis.
that's excellent. I think this is like gold standard advice, and I know it's tough, but yeah, doing whatever you like or carrying something that you like that helps you stress down a bit. I think it's phenomenal. Yeah. So if anybody knows that, I'm entering a situation where I can have a meltdown, just silently going away to whatever you like. Like, yeah, I think that's amazing. Do you have siblings, Alex?
Yes, I've got two sisters, and they're both younger than me. So one is
Mm-hmm.
about a year younger, and one is about 4 years younger than me.
Okay. How's your relationship with them?
Well, when I was younger, our relationship was really, really bad because
Oh,
I think it's difficult for the siblings of a child with autism, especially because the parents probably spend a lot of their time and attention on that child with autism.
yeah.
So my sisters used to get really, really annoyed with me.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if had had a meltdown and I was just at the stage where I was calming down, my
Mm-hmm.
sisters would always be able to say things to me that would make my stress levels shoot up again. And I would be even more stressed than the initial thing I'd had a meltdown about. So
Mm-hmm.
my relationship growing up was not really that good with my sisters. And in all honesty, it's not really improved that much as we've got older. It has improved a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but not that much. So it's always been quite difficult between me and my sisters.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything you wish could have been done differently by parents, or or in any different scenario it would have been better? I'm asking because there are lots of parents who will have kids, who will have siblings. So if they
Yeah.
can keep something in mind.
I think the main thing was that my sisters didn't really know the challenges I was going through. They
Mm,
didn't really um, understand what was happening when I was having a meltdown. So I think if they'd have had that little bit more understanding about what was going on, why I was having meltdowns, why I was struggling in school, why I was becoming really angry at home, I think that would have really, really helped them to understand what I was going through. Um, so I think that would have really helped. And I think it was really difficult for them because when I was having a meltdown, I was really loud, I was shouting, I was
mm,
storming around, running around the house. And I think
mm,
that was difficult for them. So if there'd have been any warnings, as Alex is feeling really stressed, he might be having a meltdown, they could have
mm,
then potentially kept themselves in their own room or done or gone
mm,
out somewhere or done something to
mm,
prevent themselves from being sort of in the middle of that meltdown. Because I think
mm,
sometimes when I suddenly had a meltdown without any warning, they felt like they were in the middle of that meltdown. So if they'd have
mm.
been able to remove themselves from the situation or put
Yeah.
themselves in their own room, then it would have been a little bit easier for them to cope with. But I think more than anything, I think if they'd had a little bit more understanding about, what I was struggling with, what actually Asperger's and what autism is, would have really helped them.
Do you live independently now, Alex?
At the moment, I live with my grandparents. So my parents
Okay.
moved house to a different area, so I stayed in the same area
Okay.
with my grandparents, and that
Okay.
works really well. So,
Yeah, wonderful.
um,
Okay, this has been really, really lovely. Is there something you want to share that I missed on asking you that can be useful for, adults like you or teenagers like you or parents?
I think the only thing I would say is that, everyone with Asperger's is different and with autism is different. And as the saying goes, once you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So I'd always say to any adults who may be looking after somebody with Asperger's or with autism, just treat each person as an individual. And remember that many of the things that we may need to help us through the day, whether that be at school, whether that be at home or at work, are often things that are really, really easy and simple to put in place, really easy to implement. And especially in like a school environment or a working environment, many of the things that we may need um, putting in place for us may be beneficial for people who don't have that diagnosis. So
Mm,
I always say if you're making the environment accessible for people with autism, you're probably also making it accessible for people without autism as well. So, and again, I've always looked upon my Asperger's as a positive thing. So
mm,
although it's classed as a disability, I prefer to look upon it as an ability, and I
mm,
prefer to focus on those Asperger's superpowers because I believe that my diagnosis makes me the person that you see today, and I believe that it will be the catalyst that enables me to achieve my dreams. Because I wouldn't have presented my own radio show, I wouldn't have written and
yeah,
published my own book if I didn't have that diagnosis. So I always like to focus on the positives rather than the challenges.
no, I agree with you 100%. So I wish you all the best, Alex. All the very, very best. I'm sure there will be many parents, many adults who will see this and see this in a very different light. And I wish you all the best in your upcoming book as well, in your upcoming children's series, children's radio show, whatever you want to do in life. I wish you will achieve all of it and even more.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.